Good day. My name is Nagathisan Marimutu. My ID number is 827339. I'd like to thank Dr. Noor for giving me opportunity to present a topic on Milgram experiment, which is related to the obedience among human beings. Obedience is a common feature or characteristics of humans, and normally everyone follows obedience, whether from parents, husband, wives, teachers, authorities, right? And obedience is following an order given by a person with recognized authority over us. However, obedience has sometimes been blamed for ordinary people committing horrible acts and going against their moral principle. For example, when the Nazi soldiers followed Hitler's orders to kill the Jews in the concentration camps, they are following orders, but morally what they were doing is wrong. So what Milgram did in 1963, he started a study on behavioral study of obedience, trying to understand why the people obey instruction even though it's morally against their moral principle. So what happened is what started the Milgram experiment was during the Second World War, Nazis were put on trial for slaughtering Jews in the concentration camps, and many say they did because it's an instruction they received from the higher authorities. Therefore, they are not responsible and they don't have many choice. They have to follow the instructions. But these kind of excuses, which is against the moral principles, by saying that following the authority, even though morally is wrong, is it acceptable an excuse for people? So this is something that probed Milgram to come up with a study. So what he did, he was studying, he was in a university. So first he started sending an advertisement in a newspaper, asking for people to become volunteers. All right. So basically, you collected 40 voluntary participants. All right, and they at the age from 20 to 50 years old, and most of them are from the areas where the university was based in New Havens. All right, with different occupation background. Some are school teachers, some are engineers, and just for their participation to come to the experiment center, they will pay a certain amount of money. But those who do not want to volunteer also was paid money. The payment is just for them to be there to listen to what they are volunteering for. All right. So what started off was the method of a laboratory experiment was basically on the level of obedience. When you're doing the qualitative versus quantitative data approach. All right. So he was assigning a role to those volunteers. They are considered as a teacher, and the learner will be somebody separately, who actually is a part of the experimental group, but the volunteers do not know they are actually is acting on behalf of the researchers, right? So the teachers were actually asked to read a list of questions to the participants, right? And each time the participants are wrong, they were given asked to give an electrical shock for the participants, right? So each time the shocks need to be bigger than the one before. So during the experiment, the learner can be heard in the next room shouting in pain because the shocks are getting more every time he makes mistakes. And the learner has been told to make mistakes as part of the experiment. In reality, there's no shock actually going to the learner, but it's acting and behaving like there's a shock going on, okay? As the shock gets higher, the learner asked to be let out. You scream for help. You say stop, and the participants doesn't want to continue with the shocks because they feel it's so inhuman to do that. But what will happen in these cases? The experimenter will motivate them to continue. Okay, they will ask to continue to give the don't worry, continue. Come on, let's do it. So these kind of cues are given to the volunteers to continue putting on the increased electric shock. So by doing this, they respond to the authoritative figure of the experimenter. And even though they can hear the cries and pain coming from the learner, but they continue because the instructions is given by the experimenter. Sometimes the words like please go on, please continue, actually motivating them to do to increase the voltage and keep on asking the question even though they are reluctant initially. There are some of the volunteers who actually given away. They stop the experiment because they cannot able to accept it. I think most of 4 out of the 36 of them stop because they're not able to continue because they feel morally wrong. But balance of 36 continue doing the experiment. All right. This is the method used in the experiment, and then it continues until each of the volunteers has completed. And end of the experiment, and the experimenter asks the volunteers on how do you feel about the experiment, and the results are actually shared. When the experimenter asked the volunteers, how do you feel about this experiment? Some of them was giggling, some was laughing nervously, some was sweating, some was stuttering because they're actually showing the signs of stress because they have not done this before and they're doing it with the authoritative enforcement from one person, and they also feel that the experimenter is actually responsible for their actions. They are not to blame for their actions. So transferring the blame to the experimenter make them more brave enough to volunteer. All right. Uh, the result shows that after the completion, many of the participants feels very relieved that it's over because they know that the experiment has given a certain amount of shock, some amount of stress, some amount of moral conflicts. So after the end of this experiment, they feel better. And some participants are able to remain calm from the beginning until the end. They were just normal, and even after finishing the experiment, they were calm. But some were showing very high signs of. Out of the 40 participants, 26 of them completed the whole experiment, all right? And they were obedient until the 300 watts. And this shows that they have a very high rate of success of more than 60%. 65% of the participants actually follow the instruction of the experimenter, all right? Now, the conclusion. What is the conclusion here? The conclusion was individual difference impact the entire obedience. Some of them are actually from different backgrounds, all right? Some are morally very strong. That's why you see only 26 people participated. The rest others stopped because the moral obligations and principles are strong. Whereas others are more of a compiling to authoritative figure. Their nature is to compile. And no, based on this experiment of more than 65% shows that people have higher tendency to obey to legitimate authorities. That means people instruction is given by somebody in higher authorities. They have tendencies. I mean, out of 65% of the populations have tendencies to follow instruction, even though it's morally it's not right. But because of the instruction coming from authority figure, they follow. And certain situations or conditions cause this kind of to adopt agentic state and suspend their autonomy because once they have hear instructions that the blame goes to somebody else. Furthermore, they have the motivation coming from an authority figure. Continue, please do it. Actually, they become agentic state. They follow the instruction blindly from authority figure, and they suspend their autonomy of making decisions whether it's right or wrong morally to continue. But they just blindly follow the instruction given by an authority figure. There are some limitations in this experiment. Normally, the participants, most of them are males from the same area. So it's a questionable whether it can be applied to other countries, whether the similar results can be. And then there's also the issues of ecological validity. This is conducted in a laboratory in an artificial setting, where people do the same thing in the real setting in an environment where they are actually based, like in the Nazis in the Jews camp. And in this real kind of situation, will the outcome will be the same as a questionable. And they behave unnaturally and act differently because they know this is an experiment. And this experiment, and they believe that somebody is there and to take the blame. So the overall result is based on their shifting the blame to somebody else. Therefore, this kind of biasness may affect the actual result in the actual setting. And overall, in our conclusion, Milgram experiment has clearly showed and defined that people, most of people, 65% of the populations, are tendency or eager to follow unauthorized figures' instruction. Normally, this happens in our day-to-day life, where you are on the road with a policeman. When we are with the politicians, ministers, we follow instruction for the law. We also, when we go to hospitals, we follow instruction from our specialists and doctors. We do not question or doubt them because they have the authoritative figure. So we automatically suspend our autonomy to make the right decisions. This experiment has given a very clear understanding for everyone to know how does obedience works in a society. Thank you. With this, I end my presentation.